Story 1. Water on the Roof. In downtown Los Angeles, a traveler named Elora checked into a century-old hotel known for cheap rooms, strange tenants, and the occasional police visit. A place with a long shadow cast by its history and rumors of tragedies that never seemed to leave the building. The first night passed without issue, but the second brought an odd metallic vibration above her ceiling, as if a door softly clanged in a draft, followed by a hollow echo that shouldn't exist in a windowless stairwell. By morning, the sink sputtered out dark water that turned clear only after a few seconds, and shower pressure dipped whenever someone else on the floor turned their tap. A quirk the front desk waved off as old pipes in an old building. She tried to brush her teeth and gagged at the sweet chemical taste. She assumed the chlorine was high and opted for bottled water, telling herself older plumbing always. On day 3, her floor's hallway smelled faintly of metal and something sour, like standing water left too long in a basement drain. And a couple from overseas complained the tap had an oily film that wouldn't rinse away. Late that night, the elevator stalled between floors for several seconds, then jittered down unevenly. And when the doors opened, Elora saw a maintenance cart abandoned beside the emergency stair door, with a keyring left in the top tray. Curiosity tugged at her, and she nudged the stair door to peek. A narrow shaft ascended into darkness, with a cold cross breeze, and somewhere up there a latch clinked, then gently bumped closed, like a lid catching. She shut the door and walked away fast, deciding to switch hotels in the morning, because nothing about this place felt right, especially the way the building seemed to breathe. The next morning the lobby roiled with commotion. Guests gathered in clusters, whispering about the water, bursts from taps, and weak pressure that never recovered. A maintenance worker had hiked to the roof with a ladder and found the lid of a water tank unlatched. Inside was a body that had been missing for weeks, discovered after guests began complaining that the water tasted off and ran strangely. Police said the roof access door had an alarm and was kept locked, while the tank's hatch could be opened, but not easily. And yet there she was, inside with belongings nearby, a riddle that drew armchair detectives from everywhere. The coroner called it accidental drowning. The internet called it cursed. And the building's past earned a louder chorus. A kind of lore that accretes when the ground keeps giving up sorrow. Elora checked out that afternoon, took a long shower at a new hotel, and couldn't stop thinking about how water carries everything it touches, and how it had carried someone through the veins of a building that wanted to keep its secrets. Story 2. The Vanishing Room. During a World Fair in Paris more than a century ago, a daughter left her ailing mother to consult a doctor, only to return to a hotel room, wiped of every trace that her mother had ever existed. A legend that haunted travel columns and whispered warnings like a draft under a locked door. The front desk claimed no such guest was registered. The room number was reassigned, and the wallpaper had been replaced overnight. A total reset that felt less like housekeeping and more like surgery. Though historians often shrug and call it a fable, travelers across decades told similar stories of rooms that change themselves, hallways that lead back to where a problem started, and staff who act as if a person disappeared into the plaster. Versions surfaced in European papers and late-night radio, sometimes set in Paris, sometimes in other cities, but always with the to bounce a coin. In a modern retelling, a graduate student named Amelia landed in a bustling European capital for a conference and checked into a refurbished boutique hotel that flashed designer light fixtures and anonymous smiles. Her mother came along for the trip, jet-lagged and dizzy, and asked to rest while Amelia ran to a nearby pharmacy for motion sickness tablets and bottled water. The errand took 25 minutes. On return, the key card light flashed red, and when staff issued a new card, the number matched, but the interior had been transformed. Different curtains, different bedspread, luggage gone, the citrus scent of fresh cleaning, sharp enough to sting. "You must be mistaken," the clerk said, hands folded, eyes unreadable, and a manager added that no guest by her mother's name was checked in, though Amelia had the reservation email and time-stamped charges pinging her phone. She demanded security review cameras, but she was gently led to a velvet chair, offered tea, told there was a heat issue that had required moving some guests, and that perhaps her mother had stepped out for a stroll to shake off the jet lag. The security office claimed the cameras were undergoing system updates, a refrain that repeated until midnight when Amelia's phone died of overuse and she realized she didn't remember the lobby music that had supposedly played all evening. At dawn, a chambermaid slipped a folded note under Amelia's door. "Get your passport and leave," it read in a careful hand. "These things happen when a room must not have a problem." Amelia left within the hour, later finding articles about the vanishing hotel room legend and realizing the story always ends in ambiguity. The perfect horror for travelers who trust rooms to hold their lives until morning. Story 3. The Knocking at the Cabin. In a mountain range favored by hikers and weekend recluses, a weathered rental cabin sat far from the nearest paved road. The kind of place with a heavy front door, scarred by old impacts, and metal plates bolted at head height that made no practical sense until you stayed the night. The current renter, a solitary teacher on sabbatical, arrived in late autumn with a stack of books and a thermos, intending to vanish from notifications for a week and listen to wind scrape the eaves. The first evening brought absolute quiet, a silence that crest like velvet on the ears. The kind of quiet that amplifies footfalls on leaves and the creak of old timber settling itself. Around midnight, a soft tap came at the door, so faint it could have been a branch, followed by a pause, then another tap, placed at the exact center of the reinforced panel, too precise to be wind. The teacher announced the presence of a firearm through the door, voice steady. But the response was not words. It was a rhythmic, insistent contact that grew heavier, as if whoever stood outside leaned more of their body into each impact. The metal plates shimmered under flashlight, pitted and scraped, a testimony of many previous encounters that had left the grain beneath splintered where the plates didn't reach. The sound shifted and thickened. It wasn't knuckles. The teacher realized, with a tightening in the stomach, it was something broader meeting wood. A contact patch the size of a forehead, striking and striking again. He shouted that his father was gone now, that this was the wrong cabin, anything to break the spell of repetition. And for a stretch, there was only night and his own pulse rising up his throat. When the knocking resumed, it came lower this time, then higher, as if the visitor were testing the limits of the door, mapping the weak spots by feel, or perhaps by memory. A gloved hand appearing at the window would have been ordinary human menace. A head used like a battering ram was something else entirely. A ritual or madness, rehearsed so often it had carved patterns into the architecture. The teacher held the grip of the gun and whispered to the plates in a cracked voice, asking how many times they had saved a stranger, and how many times they had simply recorded another night of the same. At first light, he left everything he had carried in and fled to the car, later recounting the story to a friend who had heard a similar account online, a clipped narration about cabins and relentless visitors who knew exactly where to hit. Locals blamed meth, blamed loneliness, blamed stories that get told too well, but some details persisted across versions. No footprints that matched the pattern of approach, no damage lower than the knee, and impacts at a height consistent with a person craning up, as if rewarded by reaching the exact place the last one had reached. The renter never returned for the books left behind, and the agency replaced the door again, plates and all. A fresh relief map for the next set of impacts to find in the dark between midnight and 3. Nearby trail users said they sometimes heard a measured, thudding echo along the tree line on windless nights, a beat that made hikers quicken their steps toward headlights and company. Some horror is a presence, some a performance. Some is simply a groove worn into wood by a head that will not stop knocking until the door remembers every strike. Story 4. The locked stairwell, a mid-rise office building in a northern capital, announced a new fire safety system and quietly warned tenants to avoid the roof stairwell during maintenance. An ask that most people ignored until the elevators began glitching and the top floor water pressure dipped. A junior employee named Marta slipped into the stairwell to take a private call, drawn by the cold air current that rises in tall shafts and the way her own voice sounded honest in the echo. Halfway up, the signal died, and when she tried the door at the next landing, the handle spun but would not engage, as if the latch were tied back on the far side by a loop of wire. She went up another flight. This door also spun freely, tight against a pressure that felt sentient, the way wind can feel personal when it pushes a door back against your hands. Above, a square of daylight bled around a hatch and drifted down the dust motes like a glaze, and something thudded softly against metal in an interval far too regular to be random. She shouted, pounded, and the stairwell swallowed her voice into itself, returning a smaller, paler version that made her think of conversations reduced to transcripts, where tone is lost and intent is guessed at. The call reconnected for a blink. Her phone chirped, then died, and in that hole of silence, she heard trickling water somewhere above, a tiny stream hitting a shallow, resonant container. Her manager finally opened a lower door and pulled her back into a fluorescent corridor, frowning, saying roof access was off limits, the tanks were being serviced, and it was dangerous to wander up there. That night, the building's group chat bloomed with complaints about water tasting weirdly sweet, set against photographs of tea gone cloudy in glass mugs, and comments about filters not catching whatever it was. The next morning, technicians propped open the roof hatch, and police tape fluttered in the breeze as officials clustered around a tank where something that did not belong had become part of the building's circulatory system. The company issued a statement that read like a machine printout. The event was isolated. Systems would be flushed. Tests were ongoing, and employees would be relocated until further notice. Marta took a long shower at home, threw out her travel bottle, and thought about how easily doors spin without catching, and how easily a building can be convinced to forget. Story 5. The Possession on Green Lanes. In North London, a family called emergency services for a son in crisis. A man in his 20s who had become suddenly violent, incoherent, and convinced there was something living inside him that wanted out. Relatives restrained him with cable ties at home and prayed in shifts, clinging to the belief that what had changed him was not an illness they could not understand, but an intruder they could expel with enough force and faith. Over several days, his breathing worsened. By the time help arrived, he was still bound, and the house smelled of sweat, fear, and the static charge of prolonged panic. He was pronounced dead mid-morning, and the case unfolded in court with transcripts that made the room feel colder. Attempts at resurrection, talk of demons, and a grieving logic that tried to make the inexplicable accountable. Reporters filed the story as a cautionary tale about the cost of delay and the danger of spiritualizing symptoms that needed urgent medicine. But something else threaded through the coverage: the stubborn insistence by family that they had resisted something real, a presence that had made him bite, threaten, and swear he had a serpent in his throat. The neighborhood learned the timeline and repeated it, as communities do when fear needs a path to escape. And soon the house was only a house again, though visitors said the air felt heavier in the front room, where the prayers had been loudest. A year later, a new family moved in and changed the curtains, painted the walls, and set down a rug that hushed footsteps. Still, the story hovered like breath on a cold morning and refused to clear. On winter walks, people passed the address faster and glanced at the upstairs window, without meaning to, the way a hand goes to a bruise, even when touching hurts, and wondered how something invisible can make a room feel crowded. Across continents and cultures, people lean on urban legends to contain danger. But some cases buck the pattern because they left bodies, court dates, and medical codes behind, material anchors for intangible dread. Hotels with cursed reputations accrue tragedies in clusters that statisticians can explain and still not exhaust, while stairwells and tanks and locked doors become settings for harm, easy to narrate and hard to metabolize. Cabins inherit performances that repeat until a door wears a memory into itself. And cities inherit stories that loop until the neighborhood learns to tell them without blinking. What makes them true, finally, is less the clean arc of cause and effect than the residue they leave in ordinary places. Water, wood, a latch, objects that remember the pressure of a night and pass it along quietly to the next person who touches them.